Hey folks, Bill here from Hot Tub University, and today we're going to talk about in-depth water chemistry. Now, we did the basics of water chemistry in our video for new hot tub owners, but we're going to dig a little bit deeper this time, because if you understand the fundamentals of how water chemistry works, then it makes it a lot easier to diagnose problems with your water. If you happen to get cloudy water, if you have green water, if you see particles in your water, and it's not just problems that you have with your water. If you throw a party and someone spills wine in your water, what do? If Junior decides to let the dog get in the water, first thing an animal does when it hits water is empty its bladder. What do? Those odd situations that don't come up on a daily basis, but if you understand the fundamentals of the chemistry, then you can actually think these things through yourself. Now, we are doing a complete series of videos on any issues you have with your hot tub, as far as hot tub water issues, cloudy water, green water, all those types of things, excessive foam, anything like that. And we're also doing a series of videos on hardware problems with your hot tub. Noisy pumps, tripping breakers, things like that. So if you want to keep all this information at your fingertips, then hit that subscribe button, because this channel is going to be loaded with good, solid information that you can depend on to keep your hot tub and your hot tub water in top running shape. Okay, let's talk hot tub chemistry. And we're not going to talk about filters, cleaning filters, or filtration settings, or anything like that, because I want to devote this video entirely to water chemistry. If you watched our video for new hot tub owners, then you might find a little bit of this stuff repetitive, but that's okay, because that'll just imprint it a little further into your brain. So, water chemistry, what does it mean? There are three components to water chemistry. There is balancing, there is sanitizing, and there is oxidizing. And first we're going to talk about water balancing. But before we talk about water balancing, there's one component of water chemistry that's not strictly related to balancing, but it is critical nonetheless, and that is the calcium level of your water. When your water has too low of calcium, the water will try to get calcium from other sources. It's going to try to steal the calcium. It's going to try to steal it from your shell, so it can actually damage the shell of your hot tub. It's going to try to take it from your plumbing components, from your gaskets. One of the biggest failures in hot tubs when it comes to leaks are gasket failures. The gaskets around the pumps, the heaters, things like that. And the vast majority of the time, it's caused by water that's too soft. So keep your calcium levels at 1 to 200 parts per million. It's easy to do. When you fill your hot tub, add enough calcium increaser to bring that calcium level up to 1 to 200 parts per million. You're protecting your hot tub. Does nothing for you. I'm sorry, you don't count in this, but you spent a lot of money on this hot tub. So get your calcium levels up and protect your hot tub. Okay, on to water balancing. The balancing of water in a hot tub is nothing more than balancing the pH of the hot tub. Guys, your sanitizer, whether it be bromine or chlorine, really doesn't care. It doesn't care about the alkalinity level. It doesn't care about the hardness of the water. It doesn't care about anything other than your pH. The reason is that your sanitizer works at a relatively narrow pH range. So when a sanitizer like chlorine or bromine is added to a hot tub, what it will do is it will seek and destroy. It will actually seek out and it will attack single-celled organisms or bacteria, algae, things of that nature. And these things come from things like sweat, like skin cells. And guys, sorry to tell you, but you're shedding your skin all day long. When you get in your hot tub, there's dead skin cells just coming off you. If that grosses you out, I'm sorry, but it's a fact of life. And you need to deal with it. Your chlorine or your bromine is going to deal with all this bacteria, but in order for it to be most effective, we have to give it an environment where it's going to work at its optimum level. And that environment is quite simply a pH level in your hot tub of 7.2 to 7.8. Now, the pH level, and pH, if you're interested, stands for potential hydrogen. The pH level of any substance can range from 0, which is extremely acidic, to 14, which is extremely basic, or some people say extremely alkaline. Neutral pH is 7.0. You want to keep your hot tub water at between 7.2 and 7.8 on the pH scale. Personally, and this is a personal opinion from years of experience, I prefer to see it between 7.2 and 7.6. That seems to be the sweet spot where hot tub water is happiest, where you get the clearest water. So we want to keep that pH level between 7.2 and 7.6, and I'm going to continue this video at 7.2 to 7.6 just because it's my video and I want to. Anyway, in order to keep that pH level between 7.2 and 7.6, there's a couple of things we have to do. Number one, and most importantly, we have to stabilize the pH level. So in order to stabilize the pH level, we need to bring the alkalinity level of the water up enough to act as a pH shock absorber, so to speak. If you think about years ago, and maybe some of you are not old enough to remember this because we don't seem to see it a lot anymore, but years ago when you'd see a car driving down the road that had bad shocks, you'd see the back of the car going down the road and it'd be bouncing like this. And basically because the shock absorbers were gone, so the springs were oscillating back and forth. The same thing happens to the pH in your water. If you had low alkalinity in your water and you tested your water, you might look at it and it might say, it's 7.4. Great, we've got perfect pH. Go back 10 minutes later and measure it and all of a sudden it's over 8 because your pH level is all over the place. So the first thing that we want to do is stabilize that pH level. Now, I'll often have people say, my alkalinity must be high because my water is more alkaline. My pH level is high, so my water is alkaline, so its alkalinity level must be higher. That's not the case. Alkalinity, or the amount of alkaline, how alkaline the water is a different measurement than the alkalinity level. And it might be a little bit confusing, but hopefully I'll try to make it a little more clear. When you refer to something as being alkaline, it simply means that it has a high pH level. When we say that something has a high alkalinity level, what it means is it's not related to the pH, it's the ability of that water to stabilize acid or to neutralize acid. So even though they're related, because water that has a high alkalinity level has an extensive ability to neutralize acid, therefore it's usually going to be more alkaline. Not always, but it's usually going to be more alkaline. But it is possible, and it's actually somewhat common, to have water that is alkaline, meaning that it has a high pH level, but has a low alkalinity level. And what will happen is even though the pH level of the water is high, it's going to bounce around. And that's what we want to avoid. We want to keep the pH nice and smooth, nice and steady, and we do that by increasing the alkalinity of the water. Now, you want to keep your alkalinity level in your water between 80 and 120 parts per million. And I'm going to deviate just a little bit here because you hear this term a lot, parts per million or ppm. Parts per million means that if something is 100 parts per million, it means that for every 100 molecules of X substance, there is 1 million parts of water. So if you have chlorine that is at 5 parts per million, it means for every 5 molecules of chlorine, there's 1 million molecules of water. Doesn't sound like very much at all, does it? 5 out of 1 million. In chlorine, you're actually talking about a very high level of chlorine, but we'll get into that a little bit later. So back to your alkalinity levels. You want to keep your alkalinity level between 80 and 120 parts per million. Now, when you're balancing your water, it's often a balancing act, and no pun intended, but you'll find that you add alkalinity level, or you add alkalinity booster, it will increase your alkalinity level, it'll also increase your pH. And then you add pH reducer, and that brings your pH down, but it also brings your alkalinity level down. So it's kind of a battle back and forth. Not a terrible issue, not difficult to deal with. Broken down simply, what you want to do is the first thing when you look at your test strip, look at your pH level. If your pH level is below 7, and there's your number, if it's below 7, balance your alkalinity to between 80 and 120 parts per million. That is the ideal range. Now, because what's going to happen is you will add alkalinity booster to get it up to 80 and between 80 and 120. That will also increase your pH level. So if it's below 7, your pH level will quite likely come into range. A much more common occurrence is when you first test your water, you're going to look at your water, you're going to look at your test strip, and it's going to show pH from 7.2, 7.8, it might hit as high as 8. In that case, when you add your alkalinity booster, bring your alkalinity levels to between 120 and 150. Technically, that's a little higher than it should be. It won't cause you any issues. It won't cause you any issues with your water. The water is still quite safe. It makes balancing your water a little easier. So if your water is between 7.2 or anywhere above 7.2, bring your alkalinity level to between 120 and 150 parts per million. Then, when you use your pH reducer, you're going to reduce your pH because your alkalinity, if your pH is, let's say, at 7.4, you bring your alkalinity level to between 120 and 150, your pH is going to be 7.8 or 8 or maybe even a little higher. Add some pH reducer to bring your pH level down to between 7.2 and 7.6 is also going to bring your alkalinity down, hopefully between that 80 and 120 sweet spot. If it doesn't quite get it there, if it's a little more than 120, guys, don't worry about it at all. I'd rather see your alkalinity at 125 or 130 and your pH between 7.2 and 7.6 than see your alkalinity right where it should be and your pH out of range. The point to really remember here is pH is by far the most important measurement when it comes to water balance. Your alkalinity level will keep your pH into a nice steady range, but the most important part is your pH balance. If your alkalinity level gets too high, it can cause cloudy water. So if your alkalinity level, let's say it's at 130, 140, your water is nice and clear, guys, don't worry about it. I often have my alkalinity up 130, 140, 150. If my water is clear, I'm not worried. It's not going to damage anything. It's not going to hurt you. If it doesn't cause cloudy water, great. Your pH is nice and stable, but make sure that pH is preferably between 7.2 and 7.6. So that's balancing your water. And next step up, we're going to talk about sanitizing your water. All right, now that we have our water balanced, let's talk about sanitizing the water. And for sanitizing, you have a couple of different options. You have chlorine and you have bromine. And to complicate matters further, chlorine breaks down into two different categories as well. You have dichlor and you have trichlor. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the different options, what we prefer, what I use personally, what I've found to be best over years of experience. But before we do, there's one product that, guys, look, if you watch any of our videos, you know we push this stuff. I use it personally, I swear by it, and that is Spa Marble. Guys, this stuff really is magic in a bottle. It's probably the easiest thing you're going to use in your hot tub because there's no measuring, there's no balancing, there's no testing, there's nothing like that. You simply pour this bottle in every 3 months. End of story. 3 months, pour a bottle in, you're done. What does it do? Okay, think about your drinking water. The drinking water that comes out of your tap, provided you're fortunate enough to have drinkable water coming out of your tap, because that seems to be not as common as it should be these days. But think about the water that comes out of your tap. It's purified. Now, it goes through a bunch of different purification systems and things like that, but they keep it pure using 1/2 of 1 part per million of chlorine. That's drinking water levels of chlorine. So if 1/2 part per million can sanitize, can keep pure the water that you actually drink, why do we need more chlorine in water that we're soaking in? Well, it's because your drinking water typically doesn't have people soaking in it with sweat and body oils, emotions, and etc., etc., etc. So here's where something like Spa Marble comes into play. Spa Marble will break down the body oils, the lotions, the dead skin cells. It will break down those multi-cell organisms, the any of the contaminants that get into your hot tub, which allows the chlorine to deal with the stuff that it does best, which is the single cell bacteria and things of that nature. So if you're using Spa Marvel, the main takeaway here is quite simple. If you're using Spa Marvel, you can bring your chlorine levels down from between 3 and 5 parts per million, which is the American recommendation. 5 to 6 parts per million is actually the Canadian recommendation. But you can bring it down from those levels down to 1 part per million. And one of the big questions we get on our message board and our forum is people say, what do you think of salt systems in hot tubs? Well, salt is chlorine. That's the bottom line. The salt is sodium chloride. The salt cell breaks apart the sodium chloride and introduces the chlorine into the water. It's an automated chlorine delivery system, and that's all it is. It allows you to have lower levels of chlorine because it's better regulated, but you're still at 3 parts per million of chlorine versus the 3 to 5 or 5 to 6, depending on where you live. With Spa Marvel, you are down to 1 part per million of chlorine. You have nothing to break, there's no salt cells to wear out, there's nothing like that. You pour a bottle in every 3 months and you're done. Guys, it's as easy as it comes. So, and by the way, what we sell on our site is the only way we make money. It's the only way that we keep this site running. So if you want to buy Spa Marvel, buy it on our site. And you know what? If you don't like it, give us an email, send us an email or a message on the board. We're going to refund you your money. That's how much we believe in it. Anyway, sorry to get off on a tangent, but this is how we keep the site running. So back to the sanitizer. What the sanitizer in a hot tub does, and it, regardless if you're at 1 part per million or 5 parts per million, if you're using chlorine, bromine, dichlor, trichlor, it really doesn't matter. What it does is it attacks the bacteria in your hot tub. It attacks the organic contaminants in your hot tub. And it doesn't attack them and then poof, they're gone. What it does is it attacks them and it forms a molecule called chloramine. Now, this is a bottle of chlorinating granules. So if I take the cover off this bottle, it's got a strong smell. But believe it or not, chlorine in its pure form is odorless. Why does this smell? Because there's chloramine in it. This, unless it's created in one of these very high-tech clean rooms, has bacteria already in it. Chloramine is what smells. And this is what throws a lot of people off, because they'll open their hot tub and their water is cloudy and they, oh wow, there's strong smell of chlorine, and they believe that they have enough chlorine in their tub, when in actual fact, they don't have enough chlorine, or more specifically, they don't have enough free chlorine. The chlorine that's in the tub has attacked bacteria and it's become a molecule of chloramine. That's what has the more potent smell. So if you get a strong smell from your hot tub, it's very likely because you don't have enough free chlorine. You might have great chlorine levels, you don't have enough free chlorine. This is why I absolutely hate public swimming pools. That strong smell, guys, that's not chlorine, that's chloramine. Anyway, I'm getting off tangent again, so let's get back on it. So chlorine will create, or bromine, will create that chloramine molecule, and that's what we want to get rid of when we actually clean the hot tub. The actual cleaning part of the hot tub is not done by the chlorine. It's done by the next step, which is oxidizing. Before we get into oxidizing, though, let's talk a little bit about bromine and the different forms of chlorine. We get a lot of questions on our website about, well, should I use bromine, should I use chlorine? I have sensitivity to bromine, I have a sensitivity to chlorine. In my opinion, chlorine is the better alternative. Now, you will hear people tell you, and it's a myth, that bromine works better in hot water. No, it doesn't. Chlorine and bromine are equally effective in hot or cold water. The two main differences between chlorine and bromine is that bromine will work at a slightly wider pH range. Where chlorine is most effective is in that 7.2 to 7.8 range. Bromine is about 7 to 8, so you got a little bit more forgiveness there with bromine as opposed to chlorine. But the big thing with chlorine, and the big downside for me, is with bromine, I'm sorry. The big downside with bromine for me is the fact that bromine can't be stabilized. Now, what does that mean? Well, chlorine and bromine both have a half-life of about 15 minutes, meaning that exposed to UV radiation, exposed to the sunlight, chlorine and bromine will break down, 50% of it will break down in the space of 15 minutes. That's why it's incredibly difficult, if possible at all, to use bromine in a swimming pool because it's constantly exposed to UV radiation, so it breaks down extremely fast. Chlorine, on the other hand, can be stabilized. So that extends the half-life, which means it doesn't break down nearly as fast, so it's longer lasting. That's why I prefer chlorine to bromine. And as far as skin sensitivity issues and things like that go, guys, use Spa Marvel. Bring your chlorine levels down to 1 part per million. Your sensitivity issues will go away. The smell will go away. The fumes will go away. So chlorine for me is the winner. Now, there are 2 forms of chlorine. There is dichlor and there is trichlor. Trichlor is an extremely aggressive form of chlorine. It works extremely well. Dichlor works just as well, but the difference with trichlor is that trichlor will, if it comes into contact with the pillows in your hot tub, or if you have different colors in the plastic of your jets or your skimmer cover or cup holders or anything like that, if they're dark color, trichlor comes into contact with them, guys, it's going to bleach them out. It's that aggressive. As a matter of fact, there are a lot of manufacturers that will void your warranty if you use trichlor. Now, how do you know the difference? Well, it's written right on the label. Like this here says sodium dichlor-E, and I can never pronounce the rest of it, but I just look for that dichlor. It says dichlor, I'm happy. But here's an easy way to tell. If your chlorine is in puck form, it's trichlor. Simple as that. Dichlor cannot be compacted into a puck form. So, and I actually prefer granules to pucks regardless. But if you have granular chlorine, you have dichlor, and to me, that's the product to use. So let's talk a little bit about dispensers. These guys, really convenient, right? Well, this adds chlorine or bromine on an ongoing basis. And guess what? It adds it whether your water needs it or not. So if you go through a week where you barely use your hot tub, and let's say you typically use it 4 times a week, and you only use it once, it's getting the same amount of bromine or the same amount of chlorine. So I'm not a fan of these. If there was some kind of a mechanism available on the market that could deliver chlorine to maintain a specific level, I'd be all over it. This doesn't. This just releases it whether it needs it or not, which is why I'm not a fan. What I recommend to people is when you first get your hot tub, or maybe you've had a hot tub for 5 years when you watch this video, when you start with fresh water or your chlorine levels are 0, notice how many tablespoons of chlorine it takes you to get to your desired level, whether that be 1 part per million, 3 parts per million, or whatever. Just notice how many there are, how many it takes. So if it takes you 4 tablespoons to get to 5 parts per million and you're not using something like Spa Marvel, then add that amount. Anytime your chlorine level is at 0, you know the exact amount to add. Toss it into your tub, and toss it in when your tub needs it. If you're using Spa Marvel in a standard 350-gallon tub, what I tell people is for standard usage, if you're using Spa Marvel, 2 tablespoons twice a week. And that usually nails it. If you have a hot tub party or something like that, you might want to give it a little bit of an extra boost, but a couple tablespoons twice a week and you have enough chlorine in your tub. So don't be fooled by these things being the greatest things in sliced bread, because to me it's a little bit deceptive, because they don't maintain a chlorine level, they maintain a chlorine release level. And there's a fundamental difference there. I find those harder to regulate once you get used to using chlorine granules. It's easy. And after a little while, basically what's going to happen is you're going to dip a test strip, say, yep, 2 tablespoons, I'm done. It really becomes that easy. So my recommendation and our recommendation at Hot Tub University is stabilized chlorinating granules, dichlor, that's the stuff to use. So now that we've balanced our water, we've got our water balanced, and we're sanitizing our water with chlorine, what do we do next? So next, now that we've got our water sanitized, and let you know a little secret here, you actually don't have your water sanitized. Even though you're using a sanitizer, the bacteria or whatever it is still in your tub. It's simply part of what's called a chloramine molecule. And as I said earlier, when you open your tub and you get that really, really strong smell of chlorine, you're actually smelling chloramine. And that is as clear an indication that your tub needs to be oxidized. Okay, what does oxidization mean? When you oxidize your tub, what you're basically doing is you're introducing a compound, whether it be a chlorine shock or a non-chlorine shock, that's going to attack that chloramine molecule. It's going to split it into free chlorine and nitrogen gas. And that nitrogen gas will gas off out of the water and leave your hot tub. The oxidization of the water is actually the part that truly cleans your water. This is why we see it so often. People do everything right. They have their water beautifully balanced, they have good levels of sanitizer, they're doing everything right, and I've gone on these calls. I've gone, to someone's place, and they're doing everything perfectly, and they say, we shock it, as we should with the right amount and everything, and I say, okay, when you shock it, what do you do then? And they say, what do you mean? Do you close the cover? Well, yeah, there's the problem. Because what happens when you add shock to a hot tub, and I really can't say this enough, when you add shock to a hot tub and your cover is closed, that gas hits the damp underside of the cover and drips right back in your hot tub again. Guys, if you do that, just as well to throw the shock on the ground, because it's doing pretty much as much good. So when you oxidize your tub, when you add shock, open your cover. Leave it open for a minimum of 20 minutes. Now, there are two ways that you can shock your hot tub. You can use a chlorine-based shock, or you can use a non-chlorine-based shock. A chlorine-based shock works like this. It's basically a superdose of chlorine. It's superchlorinating the water. And what happens is, if you're maintaining, for example, a 5 part per million of chlorine, then that chlorine has a break point. And the chlorine break point is 10 times the level of chlorine that's in the tub. So if you're maintaining 5 parts per million of chlorine in your hot tub, your break point is 50 parts per million. When you add your chlorine shock, it's super concentrated chlorine that's driving that chlorine level way up. What happens is there's so much chlorine in the tub that it starts to attack that chloramine molecule and gas it off. That's basically what happens. The downside is all that extra chlorine, guess what? It's still in your water, and it takes time for that chlorine level to come down. I actually had a situation where there was a lady who was using a chlorine-based shock. The only way she could get her chlorine level down after shocking her tub was using a chlorine reducer. Don't recommend it. I really don't recommend it. I hate those things. If your chlorine level gets too high, open your cover, turn your jets on, and let it come down naturally. But the point is, why would you add huge amounts of chlorine to your hot tub when you don't need to? Because there is an easier way. There is a better way. And it's a compound like this. This is quite simply labeled spa shock, but it's non-chlorine shock. It is made of a component called sodium monopersulfate. And what that component does is it attacks the chloramine molecule just the same as a superdose of chlorine will, but it will specifically target and attack that chloramine molecule and still gas it off without raising your overall chlorine levels. It'll raise your chlorine levels a little bit because any shock will. When you add shock to a hot tub, as I said earlier, it attacks the chloramine molecule, gases off the nitrogen, and breaks out the free chlorine. So you'll see a little bit of a bump in the chlorine, but the thing is, after you shock a tub with non-chlorine shock, 20 minutes later you can get in the hot tub again. So how often should you shock your hot tub? Recommendation is every time it's used. To me, that's a little wasteful. Basically, if you use your tub today and you're going to use it again tonight, close it up and leave it. As long as your chlorine levels are good, close it up and leave it. when you use it for the last time at the end of the day, that's when you want to shock your tub and leave it open. And you know what? I don't care if you're tired and you want to go to bed, shock it and wait for it to do its thing. Leave your cover open. It'll just make for a much better experience. Trust me. Now, when it comes to oxidizing, guys, no matter what it is, whether it's chlorine-based shock or non-chlorine shock, and this stuff, I'm in love with it. Look, I buy it by the bucket. You really can't use too much of this. You're better off overdosing with spa shock than underdosing. Now, guys, don't pour half a bucket in. It'll screw with your water chemistry, but make sure you err on the side of using too much. And the thing about shock is it's not just your oxidizer, it's also a great troubleshooter. Because if you open your hot tub and you notice that your water is a little bit cloudy, very likely it's because you have excess chloramine in your hot tub. Your first step should be to shock the tub. If your water is cloudy, if it's a little bit discolored, if you have foam in your hot tub, step one, always shock it. Shock it before you do everything else. And I see a lot of products on spa store shelves. Foam removers, clarifiers. You know what, guys? These are Band-Aid solutions. There's your miracle drug. Shock it. If you have an issue with your hot tub, no matter what it is, your first step is to shock your hot tub. And again, when you shock it, leave your cover open for 20 minutes or so. Let the shock do its job. I'll share with you a little story. I have a lakefront property, and I have a hot tub down there, and I fill the hot tub from the lake. And guys, you know what? When I edit this video, I'm going to put in a couple of pictures of what my hot tub water looks like when I fill the hot tub, because it's brown. It's literally brown. Within 24 hours, I can have that water crystal clear. And guess what? There's the guy. I'll put a good dose of chlorine in it, and I'll put a good dose. I'll bring my chlorine levels up to 10 or 15 parts per million. I'll let it circulate for 6 or 8 hours, and then I'll shock it. And guys, it brings the water clear. So your first step, any problems that you have, shock your water first. So that's in-depth water chemistry. Guys, one more thing about water chemistry. Don't chase your water balance. You can test your water balance once a week. It's more than enough. You still want to check your sanitizer level a couple of times a week. But as far as your pH and your alkalinity levels go, once a week is plenty. If you start checking it once a day, you're going to be adding chemicals, and then they're going to circulate, and the next day it's going to be a little off. Guys, once a week is plenty. If you use your hot tub a lot, and I mean 6 or 7 times a week, then maybe twice a week. But as far as your pH and your alkalinity goes, it is usually okay to test those once a week, and just keep an eye on your sanitizer level, which is your most important thing. So folks, bookmark our site, hottubuniversity.com, or subscribe to the channel, or both, because we've got a ton of videos coming out to help you with both your water chemistry and any hardware issues you might have with your hot tub. We are focusing all of this new content on hot tub owners as far as hot tub buyers. We've helped thousands of people buy a hot tub. Typically that's Chris's domain. He deals with the videos as far as buying a hot tub. I'm going to be doing most of the videos for hot tub owners and issues you might have with water, with hardware, with tripping breakers, with particles in your water, with cloudy water. Guys, we're going to cover it all. So subscribe to the channel or bookmark hotubuniversity.com. And until next time, have a great day.